On today's video, I'm cooking tri-tip on the Mini Smokeslinger in reverse flow mode. Stay tuned. So even though we're cooking this tri-tip on today's video, just to pause for a second, it's not really about the tri-tip. There's a lot of tri-tip videos and likely you've seen them cooked before. I'm gonna go over my process for how I do that, but the main focus on today's video is how to properly fire up and use the Mini Smokeslinger in reverse flow mode while focusing on how that pit behaves throughout the entire video. This will be a very useful video for those that are considering the Mini Smokeslinger, and it'll show you how to move plates around, how to build the fire and manage it, how to even use reverse flow mode as if it was 2-zone mode. So for a cook like this, I'll go ahead and prep my meat before I get the pits started up. That way it has plenty of time to sit on the cutting board. We can let the salt and the spices do their magic to the meat and pull all that stuff out and form a pellicle, and then we can get the good smoke penetration and build some bark on this thing and get a good sear. That's all magic that has to happen, and we might as well do that first before we prep the pit and get it lit up. Whenever I cook a tri-tip, I'm a fat guy. I really like to have a lot of fat on whatever I'm cooking. For instance, beef is where I really like to have that. So I'm not gonna get crazy and cut all of the fat off of this. Part of that is using the fat as a layer to protect the inside of the meat. That's going to do a few things for us. We're going to get this awesome rendered fat on the outside that's going to be like this really great tallowy, just good flavor there. We're going to get that awesome bark on the outside of this thing. We're going to be able to sear really good and build a crust, and all of that's really important there. So we're gonna do a really minimal trim on this. So anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and finish prepping this tri-tip, and then we'll be right back and we'll get this pit lit up. So on today's cook, we're gonna be using the Mini Smokeslinger in reverse flow mode, and what that looks like is we're gonna move the tuning plates around in a certain order, and the end goal with this is that we're gonna still have the effect of a 2-zone cook, so that we can smoke this tri-tip as it comes up to temperature, and then we're gonna flip it back over to the other side over the opening in the tuning plates so that we can get a good sear on it. Suffice it to say, there's a lot of different ways to fire up the Mini Smokeslinger, but this is one of the most popular ways. The benefit of reverse flow on this pit is that your charcoal basket, if it's in position in the rails, is in the middle of the smoker. It can give you that radiant heat. The tuning plates will steer convection so that it goes in reverse flow mode, and we can position food different places on this pit to take advantage of those zones. Offset mode, if you wanted to, you could go back and look at another video. Not sure if it'll be here or where it is on here or in the description. If you go back in the channel and look for the Mini Smokeslinger tour, I show you how to set the Mini Smokeslinger up in multiple ways, including offset mode. So anyway, let's go ahead and get these tuning plates moved around and the cooking grates, and then get this thing started up. So whenever I'm firing up one of my Smokeslinger pits, or any pit for that matter, I always like to bring it up a little higher than whatever the temperature is that I'm gonna cook at, and then I like to let it back down to my cooking range. What that does is it not only helps me establish a really good coal bed. I mean, this took like 15-20 minutes on the Mini. It's about the same for the full size, depending on how you manage the fire. But typically about 15-20 minutes on a big pit, longer than that. And we're gonna let that temperature come all the way up. In this case, my target zone is approximately 300. So as long as that needle is pointing straight up and down, I'm happy. The goal then, if it comes up to 325, I'm gonna start managing my fire to come back down a little bit. It might take another 10 minutes or so to let it kind of settle in. But at that point, I know everything's up to temp, my coal bed's established, and I can go ahead and start adding some wood and things like that. So in this case, I've got a couple really small splits of cherry wood. For this cook, it's not a really long cook. I'm not gonna have to like keep adding fire to the Mini as I cook this. We're cooking this thing mostly with radiant heat, and in the early stages of the cook, we're starting out warming that pit, that tri-tip up. So that's when we're gonna take on a little bit of smoke and sweat in and all that kind of stuff. And then after we get around 120 degrees, we're gonna flip that thing over the gap in the baffle plates, and that's gonna give us that sear that we're looking for. Now our target cooking temp today is 300 ish. And I like to say that in air quotes because basically I don't really care about the number. I'm looking more or less for a zone on my thermometer. And so as long as that I have that pointing straight up and down, I know I'm good. So here's how I set up that thermometer. Basically, I never tighten these thermometers down on the pit because we want to be able to move them back and forth in the threads. That's going to allow us to just turn that dial on the thermometer, the entire dial, to a number that we like, say 250, 225, 250, 275, 300, 325, and so on. I usually go in increments of 25 degrees. And I'll just point the number I want at the very top dead center of that thermometer dial. Whenever I get that turned and rotated where I want it, then all I got to do is simply look at the thermometer. I can do that from over there when I'm working on some welding stuff, or I can do that when I just peek my head right in the door if I had to run to the house real quick or something. So I can just look at that dial. I can see where that needle is pointing, and it just is just as good to me as having a wireless thermometer or Bluetooth. By the way, I hate those things. They never work, it seems, and you wind up chasing numbers more than you do the obvious things that you need to pay attention to when you're cooking. So I don't support any of that stuff. So what I've done is I've rotated that dial up to where 300 degrees-ish is at top dead center. And then as we're letting this charcoal warm up and start to get a full coal bed established, what's going to happen is that needle is going to overshoot that mark. I'm totally okay with that. 325 is about where I like to see it go, but for all I care, it could go up to 350. I'm not worried about it. And as that needle gets up that high, that's an indicator to me that we've got a really good coal bed established, especially on these direct heat smokers. So then we can go ahead and add wood to the fire, which I've got a couple of really small chunks of cherry that we're going to use today. I prefer cherry wood. I just like it's a mild, sweet smoke, and it's not going to be too deep. We're going to add those two little tiny sticks of cherry to this fire. And then at that point, we're going to let that thing start to work itself back down. Now, one indicator that I want to focus on here is the color of my smoke. As you add wood freshly, it's going to go ahead and give you like a dirty smoke, kind of gray, maybe a little bit of white. And a lot of that is all the steam and stuff that's coming out of that wood. Don't worry about that so much. It takes time for that wood to heat up. Now, whenever it fully engulfs and gets on fire, we're going to transition to a thin, kind of a blue colored smoke. And I don't get too in the weeds about whether or not it's perfectly blue. I just look at it and say, okay, well, it's cleaner than it was. So you don't have to really obsess about this thin blue smoke thing. The blue smoke, as long as it's leaning towards the blue color, we're good. Bluer it is, the cleaner it is. If it goes to clear, we're not doing anything with smoke. Matter of fact, you're just getting like a charcoal flavor, and that's one of the things you want to watch out for with your observations that you're doing during this cook. Don't forget, while we're doing all this work, getting our pit lit and getting the pit up to temp where we're cooking, our tri-tip is sitting over on the cutting board right now, and that tri-tip is also doing some magic. We've got that salt that's going in there and emulsifying and getting into the tri-tip and pulling out all of the good juices and stuff like that. That's going to help us to build up a really good seared, crusty bark whenever we get to the point of doing our sear. And while we're doing that, this needle is moving all the way up to 325, and then you're going to see it where we're going to start backing down. So let's go ahead and add this wood on. Okay, so now that we've got our wood added to the fire, we've got the firebox all closed up, we've adjusted our dampers. So as far as our damper settings go, we've got the intake on the charcoal basket door. We've got that open all the way right now, and we're going to go ahead and let this pit warm all the way up and get it past that 325 mark. And then we've got our exhaust on the side away from the gap. We've got it open all the way as well. Once that pit gets up to 225 and we've got our wood added to the pit, then we're going to start walking it back down. We're going to let that damper shut about halfway on the air inlet, and then on the exhausts, we're going to have both of those open about halfway. And we're just going to let that pit start to kind of calm down and settle in. And then once we get that back down to that 300 mark or so, that's when we're going to throw our tri-tip on and begin our cook. Altogether, we've spent about probably 20 minutes here getting all of this going. So while we're waiting on our pit to settle down, I'm going to go over here and have a cup of coffee. Okay, so now you can kind of see that our pit is leveled out and we got some nice thin blue smoke rolling. Now it's time to put our tri-tip on. Let's go ahead and get that set up. Okay guys, so now we're going to put our tri-tip on, and if you look at the grates situation that I've got going on here, I have pulled out one of each of the grates. So I've only got one cooking grate on the top and one on the bottom. And that allows me to slide these grates left and right. Most of the time, if you're just cooking a brisket or a pork butt or a tri-tip like this is a great scenario for you. So we're gonna go ahead and put the tri-tip on the top left rack, and then we're gonna put it fat cap up. And in my experience, what happens, we get a little bit of radiant heat that just kind of rolls off that lid and pushes down. It's very important to note because our exhausts are on the side of the pit. That's very intentional. We want that radiant heat and that airflow to spin down just like in an offset smoker. And what'll happen is we're gonna build some really good color and start to build a bark on top before we sear. So anyway, we're gonna go ahead and let this thing roll. We're not gonna touch anything. The pit's coming back up to temp, and here about mid-cook, probably about, I don't know, 45 minutes or so, I'm gonna come over here and check the internal temp, and then we'll move on from there. All right, guys, it's been about 45 minutes, and we haven't had to do anything to this Smokeslinger. It's been running itself the whole time. I mean, I even had time to go over and play around with the plasma table and make some parts for an upcoming build that I'm gonna be working on. Now is the most important part of the cook, because this is where we could get into danger zone about overshooting our internal temperature. Now, the way we're doing this, we're doing a 2-zone cook. We're bringing it up and smoking it to get a little bit of that cherry smoke flavor into the meat, and then we're gonna move it over the gap on the baffle plates so that we can get kind of a faux sear. If you really wanted to get a super hot sear, you would put it right over the coals. But since we got all that super heated, energized heat coming up through that gap, it's just as good of a deal. So we can go ahead and move it over that gap, and we won't have any issues getting a good, really nice crust. Right now, what we're gonna do is we're gonna check that with the thermometer, and I'm looking for about 115 degrees internal temp. Now, the reason we don't wanna go over that, you could go a little bit over, but if the more you go over that temperature, the more risk you have of getting up into medium well zone before you put it over the gap there or whatever your direct heat source is to get that crust going. What I want to do is I want to stay as close to that 115 degrees as I can. Anyway, then we're going to go ahead and move it over if we're in that zone. Okay, guys, so since we're at 115 degrees, we're going to go ahead and move this thing over. And whenever I move it over, we're going to put it fat cap down. Now, whenever I do that, I'm looking to get that fat cap melty, good, golden, yellow, rendered, tallowy, crusty, awesome taste, right? And so that's what we're shooting for here. The bottom of this tri-tip has been sitting over the reverse flow on the tuning plates, and you've got a little bit of radiant heat that comes up through those plates during that part of it. And so we're building a little bit of a darker color underneath. So we want to go ahead and move that fat cap down and balance out the appearance of this thing. What we're going to do is come on back here in just about 5 minutes. I usually check on it about every 5 minutes just to see what my internal temp is. Now, I'm going to pull that thing off of there once I cross over the 130 degree temperature area. And the reason I do that is because we've got this thing called carryover temperature. Now, what I don't want this thing to do is shoot on past like up to 140 or something like that. If we get above the 135 to 140, it's going to continue to cook at least 10 degrees hotter than what it is when I pull it off of there. So what you'll do is if you hit that 132 to 135, when you pull it, you're going to be somewhere between 140 and something like that, 140, 145. That's that 10-degree carryover. Now, if you like yours a little more rare, then you would pull it earlier than that. If you like it a little more well done, then you would let it keep going. I don't know why you would want to let it keep going and go medium well or higher than that, but you can do that. There's nothing wrong with it. So in this case, I'm looking to cut this thing open, and I want to see lots of juice running out of this thing in that fat, thick part. And I want to see some red color to it. A little bit between red and pink is what I like. So we're going to see what happens. Okay, guys, so we're sitting right at about 130 degrees, 132 degrees on the internal temp of this thing. I went ahead and flipped it right on over, and we're going to go ahead and give it just about another 5 minutes sitting here directly over that gap. And whenever I say sear, I'm not talking about just like this burnt. What we're trying to do is get a really good crust. And man, it looks really good to me right now. So here in about 5 more minutes, I'm going to pull that thing off of there. We're going to set it on this cutting board and let it rest for a little bit. Okay, guys, this is the moment I've been waiting for. I'm going to go ahead and get that tri-tip off the pit. I mean to tell you, gosh, that's hot. Look at that. Oh my goodness, that looks good. Woo, boy, you can see that sizzling right there. We've been over that direct heat, over that gap. Man, that looks good. That's the fat cap side. This is the lean side. Gosh, that's hot. This is the lean side right here. I mean, it looks phenomenal. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and basically what we're gonna do right now is we're just gonna tent this. An important thing to note is that we don't want to steam this bark. If you wrap it and have like a loose wrap or anything like that, it can steam, and what it'll do is it'll loosen that bark. Instead, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna cover it up a little bit. It's gonna keep on cooking, and we wanna get a lot of that really super hot radiant heat out of here before it overcooks. So all I got is a little bit of foil here. And whenever I say loosely tent, basically what I'm doing is I'm just gonna kind of leave the ends of this open. I'm gonna make sure this is in full contact on top. And then I just tuck it under the cutting board here, is what I typically do. And what that does is it lets the heat, the steam come out of it. The steam will actually roll out sideways because these ends are open right here. So you won't get that overcooked. We're just gonna let this thing rest, and we'll come back to it here in just a few minutes and slice her up. Okay guys, so got my seeing glasses on so I can read the thermometer here. Let's go ahead and see what we're looking at here. It's been, I don't know, about 15 minutes. I'm not really watching the clock, so we'll see what we got. We're gonna go up here in this thick end up in here. We pulled that thing at 132 and we're sitting here we are, 148, 150, something like that. That carryover temperature is no joke. It's just gonna keep cooking until you get rid of that. So anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and give this thing a slice right here, get a slicer knife out. Okay guys, let's get this beauty sliced up. Here we go. Man, it smells unreal. You ready for the shot? Here we go. Oh my goodness, look at that. Don't squeeze your brisket. That's what my buddy says. Good Lord, if you squeeze, look at that, how all that juice is still in there. Oh my gosh, yeah boy. I mean, look at that, would you? Oh my gosh, look how perfect that is. It's just wall-to-wall pink. And then you got this awesome layer of fat up on top that's gonna be crusty and beautiful. Here, let me get a slice of that real quick. And you don't want to just rush your way through it when you're slicing. See if it stays together on the knife, of course. On the sharp side, we're doing really good. Man, that is pretty. All right, guys, let's get us a bite of this thing. Just tearing me a chunk off. Man, I gotta tell you, dude, a little bit, if you do like my buddy Aaron does, a little bit of salt, a little bit of lime, a little onion, a little cilantro, oh my gosh. And you know, like the really good tasting brisket fat, that fat on there tastes exactly like it. I mean, you just cannot go wrong with that. Put that on a taco, man. Gosh, that fat, I just can't get enough of it. With that salt and with the Hay Grill Hay rub, that's a salty layer. And then we've got the 16 mesh black pepper in there. Dude, it's just crazy. Golly, that's good. I'm getting it all over me. Dude, you could make probably one of the best roast beef sandwiches you ever had in your life out of this. Guys, I'm telling you, like, I love experimenting with different cooking methods on the full size and the Mini Smokeslinger. Goodness gracious. That bark stays on. I mean, you just can't beat it. I tell you what, experiment, have fun, play around with this cooking method. I know for a fact, whatever you throw at it and you pay attention to your barbecue KPIs, you're definitely gonna be a happy eater. I tell you what, cheers, and we'll see you in the next video.